Hello guys and welcome for another video of Aeternum. If you are watching this, probably you already gave a shot to New World Aeternum as a game. Probably you've noticed that the combat is quite unique without any match in other MMOs or similar games in the genre. Probably you also noticed that the gathering, refining and crafting in the game are extremely satisfying and chill, while the amazing background music can simply feel like a spa center. You might wonder why, after all those good and positive sides, New World suffered so much in the past, and even to this day the game is still losing player numbers extremely quickly compared to other titles. Why people reach a point where they are no longer interested and they feel like dropping the game for a while until something potentially changes. The answer to that question is not as simple, and actually it's quite complicated one. Due to the different systems and how they are mixed between each other in the game, there is no definitive answer to what is the cause of so many problems and so many people leaving the game. For sure, one of the main reasons are the bugs and the exploits, which takes ages to Amazon for fixing, but this is far from the only source of that rotting problem. One of the many problematic aspects in the game is the PvP balance and mainly the wars, and today I will run you through the story of how those epic 50 vs 50 battles started in the island of Aeternum and how different they are today. In order to understand the core of the problem, we need to see how the wars actually worked in the past, how they got changed and what is their current state when it comes to participation. After the release of New World in 2021, the map was free for taking, meaning that each company which had control over the fort of a specific territory could buy the territory for itself with a 100,000 gold price. After the purchase, the territory would become a property of that same company, and each transaction in the form of crafting, gathering, trading or housing taxes would be stored in the vault for that company. In the early days, the quality of life in the game was horrible, and we didn't have the global action house, the global storage or the freedom to teleport everywhere for a small amount of Azoth. In fact, the teleporting was quite expensive and most of the people preferred to stay in the same city. This forced most of the players to simply establish themselves in the centered cities in order to have small distance and costs for traveling. Fortunately enough, those same cities are the ones who also were a starting zone for all the newcomers, which also meant that you can find everyone from low to high level. The cities in question were mainly Everfall and Windsworth, and right behind them Brightwood and Ebonscale. Since there were so many people using the stations in those mentioned cities, the owners were making piles of gold in no time. In some of the most active servers, a company owning Everfall could make close to 10 million gold per week, while in the less populated servers it could make between 5 and 7 million. Another risky addition was that the taxes could have been changed by the governing company, and if they decided, they could increase that to extremely high numbers as far as 25%. Just for your information, currently we have the taxes set by default on 1%. It didn't take long for people to notice that toxic behavior and of course to start forming new companies in order to dethrone the old owners. The way to declare war back in the days was similar to what we have now in terms of influence. However, there was a noticeable difference in that, as you could generate influence 24/7 up until you reach 100%. It sounds good on paper, but the negative side of that was the slower percentage gain on the influence, and of course the chance for the defending company to reduce the influence by doing PvP quests on their own. This meant that a company with enough players to reduce the influence towards them will be able to avoid wars for quite some time unless they wanted to actually have some war content. Of course, the good PvP players were not interested into this mechanic, as for them the most important part was to participate in wars and just to get better. With the time, all those who managed to put their hands on the big cities got so rich that they've managed to get access to the best gear possible at the time. Now the things are quite different and the gearing process is way quicker and easier. Back then, the crafting professions were taking close to 10 times more resources to level up to the maximum, and then you would have to row a craft between 595 and 600 gear score, meaning that the legendary at 600 was not even a guarantee. On top of that, while crafting you could only choose one perk or your attributes, which meant of course that the odds of rolling best in slot gear piece was lower than 1%. This is also the reason why all the good gear was starting from 400 to 500,000 gold for gloves and boots, simply because they required a bit less material than the others, and easily reaching 4 to 5 million for one of the best weapons in the game, such as the most used at that time Great Axe. Now with all that information, you can understand that governing companies were far ahead compared to all the other players, and this created a huge gap between the players. This was one of the first big things that made a huge number of players to just quit the PvP scene and to just leave it on the side. Unfortunately, AGS as always didn't act in time, as they were asked hundreds of times to change and balance the system, but they never answered to the topic, even though at the time they were making videos regularly speaking about potential hippos, promising cross-world arenas and MMR systems. Does that sound familiar? Yes, they've promised the MMR and the cross-world systems 2 years ago. While all those PvP players who held territories and gained a lot of fortune in terms of gold, gear and resources, the war scene started to filter itself. A lot of really good players were part of small companies which were weaker compared to the top guilds. The natural process for those mechanically good players was just to move in better companies, meaning that eventually all the servers had just a few companies that were fighting between each other. There was also not that much room for new players, as around that time the VOD requests and the war experience became a requirement for all the new applicants. If you never had a war but you wanted to start your journey to become a part of a warring company, you must have a perfect gear and you will be tested by the company before they can accept you. As you can imagine, at that time, with the already mentioned crafting prices and the difficulty, it was close to an impossible task for a fresh person to join the good war rosters. After many months and probably close to 2 years, AGS decided to finally change the war system for good. They've added specific window in which companies can run influence races to determine who will be the attacker for specific zone. Even if the influence race event didn't reach 100%, it was still possible for a company to declare a war, meaning that the defenders could not run back influence and avoid battles. Another thing that was changed was the taxes and the gain from the company that owns the territory. All the taxes were set to the minimum without the possibility for changes, while the gain of each territory was bound to the server gains, meaning that each small city would also take a percentage of the total generated gold in the server. This was a really nice addition and probably the only good change that they made compared to the warring system. At first, as every new thing, it was super nice to see all three factions competing and fighting all over the place of a territory during the influence run. With the time, however, this became even worse than we had in the past. The reason for that is quite simple to explain, so please focus up and listen closely in the next few minutes. A company that has a territory can decide the siege window for all their defenses in their wars. The wars, as we've mentioned already, are generated by an influence race event which occurs every few days. To be more specific, a territory will have 2 wars per week in general. In order to have wars every day, AGS made influence race to happen in different territories at different times of the week. This means that if today there is an influence race in Brightwood, tomorrow there will be in Everfall, and the day after it would be in Brimstone. This means as well that the company can have 3 territories which have 3 different warring days. But why would that be a big problem, you might ask? Well, let me give you an example. Let's assume that a company has 50 players who will participate in all of the wars. Let's also assume that all those 50 players have out accounts in 4 different servers. Before the limit was 3, but with the release of New World Aeternum, the limit for characters is now 4. If this same company choose a siege window for a server A at 7 p.m, at server B at 8 p.m, server C at 9 p.m, and finally server D at 10 p.m, this would mean that all those 50 players will simply swap between their characters and they will participate in 4 consecutive wars in the same evening. Now, this will happen each time they have a war, but as we said, if they have 3 territories, this will happen almost every day. If we consider that a war consists 100 players for both teams, if 2 companies are taking the slots for 4 of those wars per evening, this means that a potential 300 players are not taking any chance to participate. If this happens every day, this means that those 300 people are each and every day not participating. As you can imagine, the number is growing quite big, and this is the reason why 99% of the player base in New World never experienced wars. Exactly this is why the main and core PvP war players are so packed up and have so many out accounts. This is also why you see the same players playing in different servers and companies, simply because they want to do the best PvP content in the game, and this, of course, is the wars. At this point you can tell that this is a huge problem, and most, if not all, the PvP players know about it from a long time ago. There were so many discussions and suggestions even back when we had the official forums, which AGS removed in order to censor the speech of the players in their Discord channel. This is why I decided to also make this video, even after many times I stopped the work on it, because I believe that nothing will change. Due to that as well, I simply ask you to share this video with all of your friends and all of those who want to change New World to a better world, so we can have a nice and good war and PvP system. Thank you so much. Okay, so what is the idea and how it should work? I have listed all the different things in different sections, so we can go over them one by one. Section 1. Wars should be cross-server activity. All wars have to be set as cross-server activity. We already had our OPR and arena matches set to cross-world, so I guess that it's time for the wars to become a cross-server event as well. In addition to that, we will have to have a MMR system, of course, which will separate the better teams so the wars can be equal in terms of skill and experience for maximum enjoyment. Section 2. Siege window. Since the wars will be cross-server, this means that no more local wars will be held. Instead, there will be an ongoing event which is taking place every evening during the peak times for the server in question. For example, the event of company wars in EU will begin at 7 p.m. and last until midnight. In those 5 hours, all the companies from the servers in the EU zone are able to queue up for wars, and respectively they will get opponents matching their skill level due to the MMR system. As they are 30 minutes per war, 15 minutes of preparation and 15 minutes break in each hour, there will be enough time for the players to discuss the previous and the upcoming war, as well as to have a decent time to relax. When a company wins the war, it gets rewarded with more MMR points. The points for winning as a defender should of course be less than winning as an attacker, because it's easier to be defending side. This way you can also make sure that the teams eventually will be facing opponents on their level. When a company loses a war, it loses some MMR points. The points lost after a defense, of course, should be more than losing an attack, and both together should be less than the points gained after a win. Section 3. MMR system and distribution of teams. At the start of every season, which should occur every 3 months, all the teams lose their previously gained MMR and they will get reset at 1200 points. After the season begins, every team will start gaining MMR back, and eventually the best teams will get to the top of the leaderboards for wars. The 1000 points in the imaginary Elo scale should be the bottom line, and the teams should not go under this line. This means that even if you lose 5 wars in a row and you had 1000 points, you would still have them as your MMR, as you cannot go lower than this. This is in order to prevent teams going so low in case of unlucky wars at the start against stronger opponents and then not being able to find a war during the queue times of the event. Section 4. Rewards for the wars. When the season is over, which again should be each 3 months, the teams are getting rewarded for their participation and their placement in the leaderboards. Note that here the rewards for the top teams should be exclusive in the form of skins and titles, but should be also lost after the next season is over. This means that if your company took first place in Season 1 but finished only 10th place in Season 2, your exclusive skins and titles are now gone. Or said in other words, the rewarded skins or titles should have a duration of 90 days, same as the seasonal pass. Additional rewards can be added in the form of gold, materials and other things, but of course this is up to a debate and up to a balance. Section 5. The structure of teams and the availability for more players. In order to make everything as close to equal in terms of rules for everyone, mercenaries should not be allowed, meaning that only company players can take participation in the wars at the evening. In case a company is missing players and wants to have someone to replace them, they will have to invite the new players to their company, and this way the MMR lost or gained will be applied to the company. In those cases, the best players would not be able to play on several different servers and several different companies, as if they do, they are potentially risking their placements in the leaderboards on their main and own company. This way also gives the chance for far more players to experience the wars and also to gain some expertise in terms of big PvP combat, and it's needless to say that it will also boost the player-to-player interaction, as there will be much more need to find new players in order to generate new companies. Another change that can be considered and was already mentioned in the past is to reduce the total amount of players in wars to 40 for each side. This would not only give an easier time for people to gather up and build their teams, but also it will increase the performance during wars. Section 6. Ownership of cities. As we've mentioned already, the cities in Aeternum were controlled by the best PvP companies, and they were held for quite a long time on all the servers. What will happen to the cities, however, if this change that we've discussed comes to life? My suggestion to that is quite simple. All the cities will be predetermined in quality, so the better companies will get better cities, and technically it will be a win for win. Let's assume that Eden Grove remains the best quality city in terms of income. Company A from server Nissa is placed first on the leaderboards after the season for wars is over. This means that the company gained the territory of Eden Grove in the respective server of Nissa for the next season. At the same time, Company B, which is from server Arrow, was placed second on the leaderboards for wars, but it also takes Eden Grove in their respective server in Arrow because this is the first company of the server on its own. The same logic can be applied to all other cities and servers. The amount of territories can be set to 2 as well, but I believe that 1 should be okay, as this way each company will have 1 territory corresponding to their performance, and this will also boost the desire of newcomers to actually participate in wars. The other things related to the territory owning, such as invasions and upgrades, should remain as they are. We should also note that invasions are probably up to a change to a specific game mode, so this would be even a boost to the right direction. Section 7. Influence races. Since the influence races were the ignition for each war, with this change they would not be needed and might become unusable content. Instead of letting that happen, they can be reworked in another PvP open world mode, which can be used as a warm-up before the actual wars in the evening. To make it more appealing to the players and to make them participate, better rewards and items could be added to those races. Another thing should be also taken in consideration, that even if the races are taking place on a Covenant territory, for example, Covenants should also participate for control. My idea for this to happen would be to place additional 3 towers, which will boost the total to 6 without counting the actual fort in the territory. At the start of the race, each faction begins at 0%, and after 25 minutes, the faction with the most points is the winner. Holding a fort should reward the most points, followed by it holding the smaller towers, and then the kills done to the faction. The time should be reduced to 25 minutes, so more races can occur in less time, meaning that you would have 25 minutes per race and another 5 minutes to prepare for the next one. In general, this is my vision about the wars and how they can be improved for better for everyone. I truly believe that if those changes come to life, at least 500% more players will take participation in wars, and it will have a reason and meaning to do it. Please let me know what you think about this war topic and tell me if you would like to see this idea becoming reality. If that would be the case, let's try to push that to AGS, even though they would probably ignore us and they would keep it as it is. But at least we will give it a try. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one.